Welcome to Creating Plans for Loved Ones with Memory Loss. We're in the section called Memory Loss, Early Indications, Progression, and Recognizing Signs. And this section is talking about recognizing signs of memory loss. You might be saying, Pamela, why do we need to recognize signs of memory loss? We already know that our elderly parent has memory loss. It's important for several reasons. One, because you may be at the very early stages of memory loss with your elderly parent. And by recognizing the changes that happen as memory loss progresses, you can be more prepared for the unexpected. Caregiving is filled with the unexpected, things that we would never expect to happen, things that we would have never imagined to happen. So in this part, we're going to talk about recognizing the signs of memory loss and everything that goes with it so that you can be a more informed and more prepared caregiver. You know how I believe in prevention. You know how I believe in being proactive to avoid a lot of unnecessary surprises and crisis that can happen in caregiving situations. So welcome back. We're going to get started. I'm going to again do my very quick introduction so that you all know how this program works. So housekeeping, you know this. I use the term elderly parent or elderly parents. Substitute that term with the person that you are caring for. If you have not printed out the outline for this module, stop this video, go print it off, come back so that you can take notes, write down your questions. The ellipses in all of these slides, again, they are purposeful. I purposely put them in there so that you are participating with me as we go through this slide presentation. So what do we hope to achieve from recognizing the signs of memory loss? At the end of recognizing signs of memory loss, you should be able to differentiate between things that happen with age and treatment needs of elderly parents. You should be able to identify why dementia is commonly undiagnosed and to recite 16 signs of memory loss and why your elderly parents may have difficulty realizing they are forgetful or accepting a diagnosis of dementia or Alzheimer's disease. This is one of my favorite slides. People always say, doctors always say, oh, this just happens with age. Things happen with age. My response is no, not always. There are many early signs of dementia that do go unnoticed until a major accident happens. Some physicians, some family members view physical weakness, memory loss, or health concerns as things that happen with age. I disagree. Signs of memory loss may not be noticed because of infrequent contact with friends and family. In my opinion, that idea of things that happen with age rob people of creating what I mentioned to be a care-forward attitude, a care-forward environment. None of us have to be defined by the number on our birth certificate, the number on our driver's license, a health diagnosis, unless we choose to be defined by that number. So what does that mean? It means that we can choose to manage our health concerns or diagnosis how we decide. And then we can go on to live full, active lives, not limited by disease or by age. So what do you think about aging? How long do you think or do you want to live? How do you see the last years of your life? Your responses to these questions might be formed by your sense of how well your grandparents lived, or your parents live, or they have lived. If you have positive examples, you may think more positively about aging. If not, you may be more pessimistic. I want to talk about my idea of care-forward living. The experiences of my youth really created this idea for me. I watched my mom suffer for 30 years with health issues, one health issue after another. My perception was that health problems dictated her life. There were times when she didn't want to go on vacation because she was afraid that if she left home, she would end up in an unfamiliar hospital in another state. It happened. Being hospitalized away from home happened so many times that eventually she refused to travel anymore to go on vacation with my father. At the age of 24, I made up my mind that this was not how I wanted to live. I was not going to be old and sick. I witnessed the curse, I call it, the curse of my mother's bad health, but I also saw the blessing of good health in having the other side. My 95-year-old grandmother who had arthritis, she was mentally sharp, physically in pretty good shape, extremely positive and active. Despite saying, yeah, I have a few aches and pains from arthritis, she was out planting flowers in her 90s. I loved this woman. She was my favorite person in the whole wide world when I was a young child. This shows the differences. We can make up our minds about how we want to live when we age, regardless of whether we have health complications, if we're proactive at an early age. But this mindset, it takes advocacy with the healthcare system that views older adults as undeserving of treatment, and women more commonly, I hate to say it, but as emotional complainers instead of patients who have serious health concerns that doctors should pay attention to. Doctors don't suggest treatment because they believe that this is just how somebody who is 70, 80, or 90 is supposed to feel. Family caregivers, you may not know, you should disagree with the doctor. If your older parent doesn't speak up, or if they have dementia and they can't speak up, treatment can be denied. Aging in the healthcare system doesn't have to be this way. You as the caregiver must be the change to fight against bias in the healthcare system, against middle and old age patients, of which all of us can be one. Let's talk about why dementia goes undiagnosed. The obvious is that it's because that we have this belief that individuals become old and physically weak and forgetful. We're less likely to notice physical changes in the ability to walk, which is one early indicator of dementia. Then, because there's no sudden physical car crash, like a heart attack, that indicates heart disease, there's no car crash that tells us or a loved one that they have memory loss. Dementia in aging adults is then undiagnosed in about 50% of people over age 85. The reason is, again, like we talked, these cognitive changes and memory loss may be difficult to notice. Adult children don't know how to talk to a parent with suspected dementia. Aging adults, when they go to the doctor, they can't self-report signs of memory loss. They normally are not going to be someone who says to the doctor, gosh, doc, I'm noticing that I'm forgetting, unless a family member or a friend who knows them very well has mentioned some of these occurrences. Then the older person may mention these signs to the doctor so that a diagnosis can be investigated or a diagnosis can be pursued. So I want to talk about dementia and years ago and this idea of senility. In my neighborhood, we had a lady whose name was Bernice, and she lived alone. She lived in this house behind this huge thicket of bushes. And when I was young, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, there was a local grocery store in our neighborhood. So as kids, we would go get penny candy. How many of you remember penny candy? It doesn't exist anymore. But so we would go to buy our penny candy at the grocery store, and this lady named Bernice would be walking through the neighborhood. And she always wore a dress, she wore tennis shoes, and in her hand would always be a rosary. Bernice would walk and walk and walk, like blocks, miles, everywhere. Bernice walked all day with a rosary in her hand, and she would pray the rosary and she would talk to herself. She would notice us kids and she might say hello, and we were not afraid of Bernice. Bernice was harmless. She was a sweet lady. But what I learned later was that Bernice likely had dementia. She likely had Alzheimer's. Her memory loss progressed to the fact that people in the neighborhood would start watching out for her and taking care of her. Another example, in my own family, I had an uncle named Uncle Benny, and I would visit Uncle Benny. And he would say to me, well, why don't you ever call? Why don't you ever visit? And I'd say, well, Uncle Benny, I called you yesterday, or I was here last week. Uncle Benny really didn't remember that I called or visited. And sometimes he would say, "You need to call or visit more." And I would laugh and I would say, "Oh, Uncle Benny, I promise I will." Again, back then, this was over 20 years ago, I was not familiar with Alzheimer's or dementia. Uncle Benny eventually did have a diagnosis of Alzheimer's. His family, because my aunt had passed away, had to move him out of his home because he would start to wander. He would leave his home and he would get picked up by neighbors or the police in another part of town. So he had to be moved to what we call a gated care community today so that he was safe. So it's interesting, just in the span of 20 or 25 years, how far we've come in recognizing Alzheimer's or dementia, but yet 50% of people over the age of 85 are undiagnosed because their family members don't know what to look for in dementia, just like I didn't know what to look for 20 or 25 years ago, which is why we're going to continue to talk about the signs of dementia. So I have a podcast, you know about my radio show. It is called How to Talk to a Parent with Dementia. It's a great show that I did, and I interviewed a doctor named Stephen Post, who has been involved in the dementia world for many years. A lot of times the primary caregiver becomes frustrated with other family members who either won't visit or they call and they speak inappropriately. They may be asking mom or dad, "What did you have for breakfast? What did you do yesterday?" Mom or dad get upset because they can't remember. And so this happens for a couple of reasons. The first is a lack of education about the disease and how to talk to a parent with dementia. Family members may not know what to say. They may not know how to react to behaviors. If you are a caregiver for a person with dementia, you already know, or you will learn that learning to talk to and interact with an elderly parent who has dementia is a learned skill. If you have a family member with dementia, this is a great podcast to share with other people in your family, brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, so that they have a better understanding of the kindness and compassionate communication and interactions that we can learn to have with our elderly parents and other people diagnosed with dementia. So let's talk about 16 signs of dementia. In this slide, we're going to talk about number 1 and number 2. The first is difficulty paying bills, managing money, or with tasks that require math. This task actually goes back to the possibility of a diagnosis 10 to 20 years before a diagnosis, because we tend to lose our math skills and our computational skills early. These examples are like balancing a checkbook, math. Noticing these signs can be a little difficult if someone lives alone and if you don't visit frequently to witness the changes. So what you want to look for is signs of bills, mail, piling up at your parents' home when it never happened before. Does your parent seem to have more difficulty making decisions about managing household projects? For example, if they need a new furnace and a furnace costs X versus Y, can they differentiate between why they should buy one furnace over another? There may start to be computational concerns about costs. Isolation is another issue. One of the consequences of isolation, which occurs in about 40% of the population, is depression. But you might notice your parents purposely becoming more isolated. Maybe they don't go out as much to events. Maybe their friends are not visiting as much. Maybe their friends have mentioned to you that, gosh, your mom or dad, they're not acting right in social situations anymore. Any type of concerns about leaving the home, whether it's driving or going out, can also be noticeable as a concern of your parent having memory loss and either being afraid to go out or not interacting appropriate with people or having people react negatively to them. I want to share. This story is about a client of mine named Hope. And Hope was a client that I had for many years. I first met her when she lived in an apartment complex because her apartment manager called me with some concerns about possible memory loss and Hope not being able to take care of herself. The event that precipitated this phone call was that Hope was out shopping one day. She lived close to a grocery store, about 4 or 5 blocks, and she could walk there every day. But one day she got knocked over by some young kids who tried to steal her purse. Fortunately, it was around her arm. She had it close to her. They didn't get the purse. But this event scared her to death. After this, she told the apartment manager, I'm afraid to go out. I'm now afraid to go get groceries from the grocery store because these kids almost knocked me over, stole my purse, took all my money. I could have gotten seriously harmed. I don't want to go out anymore. So the apartment manager contacted me because I was well known in the community and helping in these types of situations. I got the information for her family who lived in Boston, contacted them, got permission to become involved. I eventually became Hope's medical power of attorney, financial power of attorney, and the personal representative of her estate. I had the blessing and the pleasure of taking care of this delightful woman for the rest of her life. She was interesting in the fact that she was a single lady, never married, had dated, never had children, had a few friends, but her friends kind of fell away when she started having memory problems. The percentage of people now who are aging who are elder orphans. So elder orphans are people who are single, their parents have passed away, they don't have children, they've never married. The greater likelihood of you needing to plan for situations like Hope's, where you're by yourself. You don't really have anybody to step in and take care of you, or you might think a family member will step up, but they may not. There's no guarantees in life. Planning early, especially if you don't even have Alzheimer's in your family, is so very, very important. We're going to continue to talk about more signs of Alzheimer's disease. So the 16 signs of dementia, numbers 3 to 7. I'm going to go down the list and then I'll explain each of them. Making poor decisions, exhibiting impulsive behaviors, forgetting recent conversations or information, forgetting to complete routine activities, a loss of social skills, and the inability to recall how to complete familiar tasks. So let's talk about making poor decisions and having impulsive behaviors. These include things like spending money unwisely. That is a new habit, not a lifelong habit. Many people don't manage their money well. If you have always done that and it's different, you may have memory loss. The example of this lady sitting on the bench. Maybe you're wearing winter clothes in summer, or the opposite, wearing summer clothes in winter. Maybe you drive a car after you've noticed that you're starting to get lost. You might donate huge sums of money to charities, buying things that you don't already need because they already are in your home. So another box of cereal when you already have 5. I had one client who did that. She would go to the grocery store and forget that she had peanut butter or cans of soup. And then she would get home and say, oh my gosh, I already had this. What was I thinking? Dementia results in a decline in the ability to reason and to evaluate information, to make good decisions, and to avoid impulsive behaviors. The next one is forgetting recent conversations or information. A lot of people can remember events that happened 50 years ago. They can't remember information from yesterday, today, or 5 minutes ago. Examples include losing or misplacing items. Now, we probably do that ourselves, but we eventually remember where we put them. Some older people never find those items. Or you may get 10 calls from an aging parent every day asking the same questions. Dementia eventually progresses to the point where recall is non-existent. Even seconds after a statement is made, the person doesn't remember what was said or what the conversation was. We'll talk about strategies for these behaviors in the last section of this module. The skill of redirecting conversations and activities is a solution that helps in many of these situations. It is a skill that you can learn. One more tip. Never, ever rearrange any items in the home of your elderly parent who has memory loss. Mom or dad will not be able to find them. The next one, forgetting to complete routine activities. We talked about this. This was the story of the client who could not get the newsletter out. But other activities include forgetting to bathe, dress, take medications, eat, forgetting to turn off the stove, leaving running water in the bathroom that results in a flood. Many of these issues can turn into serious issues. Loss of social skills. This one I call out of the mouths of babes. Many children, young children, will say what they think without realizing what they say is inappropriate. You know, examples of a child saying, "Oh, you're fat, you're ugly." Aging adults with dementia turn back to this childhood state because the part in their brain that tells them what is appropriate and what is not appropriate doesn't work anymore. An example is I had a client who was a concert pianist. She was a woman. And amazing accomplishments. She played in the symphony in Canada. All the years where she was growing up, she had to fight male prejudice, saying, "Oh, women shouldn't be in the symphony. Women can't play the piano. What are you doing here?" So can you imagine when she became older and she had dementia? Do you think she spoke nice about men? She did not. Her children, though, were shocked because she was very proper. She was very appropriate all of those years, being a concert pianist in symphonies and playing all over the world. She was very appropriate, very polite. But when she got dementia, everything that she probably thought about those men all of those years who discriminated against her because she was a woman, who told her she wasn't good enough to play the piano, who told her she wasn't good enough to play in the symphony, it all came out. I personally found it humorous because I wasn't her children. I was involved in her care. But these things happen with your elderly parents, and know that you may be embarrassed, but it comes from years of things that happened earlier in their lives. Let's talk about the inability to recall how to complete familiar tasks. This could be how to cook a family recipe, how to get in and out of a car, how to walk with a walker, how to dress and place clothing on the body appropriately for the weather, or not wearing clothing inside out. As dementia progresses, these activities that many of us take for granted become very difficult for a person with memory loss. We talked earlier about working memory. Working memory becomes faulty when we can't recall how to perform familiar tasks. Let's go on with more signs about dementia. So these include trouble planning or problem solving. Simple actions like forgetting how to dial a telephone, how to use the television remote. I can barely do this myself because I am not a technical person, but older parents with dementia have great difficulty with these things. Even how to use the microwave result from a diagnosis of dementia. Having difficulty resetting the time on a watch or a clock, missing doctor appointments, these are signs that memory loss is progressing. There's the orientation to day, date, and time. Reversing the day and night clock by being awake all night and sleeping all day will happen as dementia progresses. Increasing afternoon agitation, it's called sundowning, happens between the hours of 4 to 7. That can increase as memory loss progresses. These are more challenging for caregivers, especially if you're living with an elderly parent, you're providing care and you need to sleep at night so that you can work during the day. Afternoon agitation can last for hours, and by the time you are home from work, you are exhausted. Difficulty communicating and word finding progresses as memory loss progresses. It's the ability to communicate simple things. Many people with dementia will eventually progress to one-word answers instead of answering incomplete sentences. Sometimes they will get words mixed up. This is called word salad, or they'll forget words. They'll be talking to you and they'll say, "Well, you know, that that thing, and they can't think of what the thing is. Or they could name something incorrectly, mix up words that should be at the end of a sentence at the beginning. If you are the family caregiver who spends a significant amount of time with your elderly parent, you will be able to learn how to communicate by facial expressions, words, or actions to comfort your elderly parent who may be struggling to communicate. We'll talk more about this in the section about behaviors. Repetitive speech or actions, pacing, unpacking and unpacking drawers, asking the same question over and over again. They indicate a need for reassurance or anxiety, but also the fact that memory loss is progressing. Let's talk about visual or spatial activities. What this means is walking and missing or tripping over a curb, tripping over steps, looking in a mirror and seeing somebody else. So for example, I would have a client who would look in the mirror and he did not see that person as himself because he thought he was 25 years old. So certainly this old person in the mirror could not possibly be my client. These are the things that happen when visual or spatial difficulties progress. Visual spatial is another one of those medical speak terms. And it's simple. It's you see a curb, you know that you must take a step up onto that curb to avoid tripping, but people with Alzheimer's may not even see the curb. They lose that ability. Behaviors that change from day to day increase as memory loss increases. Things like agitation, mood swings up and down, paranoia, bad language, verbal aggression, physical aggression. This can happen if your parent is feeling threatened, afraid, if there's too much outside stimulation going on, too much noise, too many people. They can wander out of the house, become lost like my Uncle Benny. These are all concerns for caregivers of elderly parents with memory loss. Few more signs of dementia. Walking, balance, and frequent falls. And this is an important one because this goes back to 10 or 20 years before a diagnosis. These things can be noticed, and they're both physical and they're cognitive, and they begin in the brain. Walking and balance are affected by our central nervous system that begins to experience declines in people with memory loss and dementia. As a result of the dementia, and this is a little technical, but the brain and the spinal cord are not communicating as well. The nerves in our muscles are not communicating as well. And so what we see are physical problems with balance, with walking, being able to put one foot in front of another, that's called gait. In problems with depression, sleeping, thinking, and memory. Elderly parents with dementia can experience frequent falls because of poor balance and that depth perception that we called visual perception. As we talked, curb steps may seem higher or lower, tripping results, risks can occur to our parents, to others, to property. Family members may not notice these falls or poor balance as being as significant, but they are. These incidents are often attributed to, oh, they're just getting old, or, this just happens, rather than being attributed to, gosh, I wonder if something's wrong with health, or I wonder if something's wrong with memory. Walking, gait, balance all becomes more difficult with people who have dementia. You may see your parents shuffling their feet or dragging one foot behind another. That can indicate memory loss. Bad posture, any prior injury. Somebody could lean more on one leg. They may walk lopsided. All of these can contribute to dementia. And I want to talk about poor driving skills because this is an area of controversy with your elderly parents. I laugh because your parents, they do not want to give up that car, much like they did not want you to start driving when you were 16. They were worried you were going to have a car accident. Now the roles have changed. You are scared to death. They are going to have an accident or worse, hurt somebody. The ability to drive is really a breakdown in communication when older parents start to have difficulty. Between the brain, the nerves, the muscles, reaction time, we need all of those to be able to drive. Even that physical ability to turn their head and look to see before you change lanes, Or if somebody is coming out of another direction, you see them and you step on the brake before you drive through that intersection. So reaction time and all of these are important. My father was one of these people who started to have car accidents as he aged, and it was because he could not very easily turn like this to look to see if there was somebody in the other lane. So he started driving less and less, which was a good thing because he knew that he wasn't safe. I want to talk about the George Weller story, and this is a true story. You may have heard about it. About 2003, Santa Monica, California, there would be a farmer's market on the promenade on the weekends. George Weller, retired gentleman, Army veteran, a lot of good community things. He would volunteer in the community to help kids read. He and his wife were very involved in the church, but George had a couple of health issues. He was driving one day by the farmer's market, driving down, accidentally hit a barricade, swerved, hit another car, accidentally, instead of stepping on that brake, stepped on the gas, 1,000 feet through the farmer's market promenade, injured a number of people, killed people. When he was interviewed, and you can find this interview on YouTube, he was interviewed and he said, you know, I had that car accident and I remember something hit my windshield. I don't know what it was. It was the body of a person that he killed. George Weller didn't have Alzheimer's. He didn't have dementia. What he did have were health problems that permitted or inhibited flexibility to do this and this, knowing to step on the brake instead of that gas pedal. George Weller suffered for many years of his life after this accident with regrets, just like the families of the people who suffered because they were injured or their loved ones were killed because of that car accident. Your parents will swear on a stack of Bibles that they can drive as well as they did when they were young. The problem is there's that disconnect up here. They can't remember that they didn't. So what do? There are some options. There is a test called Drive Able that is in most communities that if you Google it, you can find it. It is a test that is a simulator that tests physical ability to turn, to look in the next lane, or to look over a lane. Also, reaction time. Do they step on the gas pedal at the appropriate time? Do they step on the brake at the appropriate time? The test gives you a result of the likelihood that your parent will be involved in a car accident. It's factual information. It cannot be disputed. You can use this to send to the DMV, to have your doctor write something to revoke their driver's license, to give to their car insurance companies. Because what many families don't realize is, if your parent has a diagnosis of dementia and it's documented, and they have a car accident, and they seriously harm someone else, your family can be sued for the injury to a young child, to another person, to somebody who might be in your parents' car because they drove and they knowingly had dementia. So let's cap off these signs of dementia with accidents in the home, which are a huge thing. Elderly parents can become distracted. They can leave the water running in the bathtub, leave something on the stove. The result is serious damage to the home. And it could be harm to themselves. Maybe they are sleeping at night, they light a candle, the candle lights the house, the home burns down. Your elderly parent could die in a fire. When they live alone and contact is infrequent, many times accidents happen and your parents may not report it because they find a way to get it fixed. Or they never tell anybody. You show up one day, you see the car in the garage, you're like, oh my gosh, what happened? The car is wrecked. I had clients with dementia who flooded their basements, who had stove fires, who had car accidents. These are safety concerns to take seriously. They must be managed. Your elderly parent are not going to want to talk about these, but it is so important to do it. And this leads us into the next section of having difficulty accepting a diagnosis and why this happens. So it happens because there's not that I call it car wreck of a health diagnosis. There's no heart attack. There's no broken hip. There's no broken ankle. Memory loss happens without that train wreck, of course, unless your elderly parent does get into a car accident, floods the house, starts a house fire. So in addition to physicians not testing to diagnose memory loss or being forthcoming to discuss mild cognitive impairment and the way that it progresses, elderly parents are not forthcoming because they can't notice signs that they have memory loss. Memory loss without these extensive tests, the CT scans, the MRIs, the PET scans, the blood work, genetic testing. Memory loss without that, older adults don't want to admit that they have it. They have to rely on others to identify symptoms. Forgetfulness, missing doctor appointments, forgetting that a phone call was made. With dementia, unlike other health conditions, we want to return to the prior state, but it's not possible. We can't fix memory loss. I will have elderly clients that say, oh my gosh, this memory loss thing, it crept up on me. I didn't notice. One day I didn't have Alzheimer's or dementia. The next day I did. Others will admit that maybe they do have memory loss, and maybe I have memory loss and I just don't know it. The other benefits of this early diagnosis, again, include the ability of that person to understand what Alzheimer's is, understand what dementia is, and realize the importance of talking to family about support, and also to allow families to spend time together when memories can still be shared, when memories can still happen. You'll hear me repeat this, but talking about dementia and planning for care is so important. It's so essential. So to summarize this section about recognizing the signs of memory loss, we want to adopt a care-forward thinking attitude about memory loss so that we can be as proactive as possible, so that we can still have shared experiences with our family members. Diagnosing supports us talking about it. It supports your elderly parent being able to say, yes, I do have Alzheimer's, or yes, I do have dementia, before it's too late and they cannot understand. Also, these 16 signs that we talked about, they all don't happen at once. They're not all that train wreck that happens. They happen in stages, and noticing the different signs can help you recognize that the progression of memory loss is getting worse, that you might need to look out for other things that are happening so that you can become a more prepared caregiver. Also, as the main caregiver for a loved one, you have the opportunity to educate other people in your family who may say, I don't want to visit. I don't want to see mom or dad like that. That is more about the other person and their fears, their lack of education, what they don't know, maybe their fear of having Alzheimer's or dementia. These sessions, these webinars, arm you with the tools to be proactive. And while all of this may not be relevant to you today, there may be bits and pieces that you can pick out that are relevant. All of this will eventually be relevant in its entirety. Learn what you can from each of these webinars, take away what you can, come back, watch them again later. Remember and say, oh, I think that lady talked about this. I think that webinar might have information that today can help me, or information that I can share with a family member. It is so important to learn how to talk to parents with dementia, so important to learn how to converse, to interact, and to help your family members and others through the caregiving process and through the process of caring for a loved one with dementia. Thank you for being here with me during this webinar. I'll see you in the next webinar.